Welcome in, everybody. This is your self-care staffing for Monday, April 13th, 2020. I am Lou Pascal. I'm the school social worker in the Manchester City Schools in Manchester, Tennessee. And welcome back from spring break. If you were on spring break last week like I was, or welcome back from Easter weekend. I hope you had a wonderful time. I wanted to do a check-in before we start today. I finished my hashtag quarantine goals list. You guys may remember this. It was just a short list of some things that we could be doing while it is recommended that we stay home. And so the last thing that I needed to check off my list was I wanted to complete 5 meditation sessions on the Insight Timer app. And so I did that. And that was really good. That was a good goal for me because I've really been knowing that I needed to attempt to make meditation a part of my life for a long time. And I just have not been successful in being motivated to do that. So that was a good goal. As you can see, one of my goals was that I was going to read the Curly Girl Method because I wanted to see how my hair would do if I just went wavy, just embrace the waviness of it all, because that's the way my hair actually really is. And I know that's sort of like a first world problem in the midst of all this, but this is just kind of a lighthearted thing to do. So that's where I'm at in my curly girl journey. So I think things are going pretty well there, in case you were wondering. And I also wanted to ask you guys a couple of self-care check-in questions before I went to the topic I wanted to discuss today. And these are just things I've been thinking about as we perhaps move towards some sort of end date of this. We don't know if we're close to the end of this or not. Currently today, my school system is closed for this week and the next week. We're closed through April 24th. So we could go back after that, or we don't know. More details as they become available, I'm sure. But if we are nearing the time when we're going to be getting back into the swing of some things, these are my questions. The first one is, what are you looking forward to when the stay-at-home recommendation or order, whatever the case is for you, is lifted? What are you looking forward to when the stay-at-home recommendation or order is lifted for you? So this is silly. There's a lot of things to look forward to. Of course, getting back together with all of our people, our family, our friends that we haven't been able to interact. Well, we've been able to interact, but we haven't been able to be physically close to them. Of course, that's something to look forward to getting to do when things go back to somewhat normal. I'm hesitating to say normal because I don't know how back to normal things are going to be. But just one kind of silly thing that I'm looking forward to that I've been thinking about for several days is I'm looking forward to being able to go to Sonic and get my favorite drink, which is a Coke Zero with vanilla. So I'm looking forward to that. We have Coke Zero at home. It's not really that. I think it's just enjoying being able to go and, get a drink while you're out and about doing errands or whatever. So I'm looking forward to my Coke Zero with vanilla from Sonic. So that's one question. So I'd encourage you to try to think of some things that you can look forward to when we're kind of back out in the world again. That's question 1. Question 2, what do you want to be different about your life after your quarantine? What good things can you take with you from this experience? So is there anything, just think about in the time that you've been home, is there anything that's been something that's been different that you've really enjoyed and you think, how can I work more of that into my life when we go back to work, or whatever the case may be. So I can answer that also. The whole meditation thing has been really enjoyable, a lot more than I thought. And I'm going to tell you about a particular one that I am doing and hoping to integrate as a part of my life after the stay-at-home recommendation is lifted. But something else I've been thinking about is, like, if you're thinking about new habits, and I don't think this is my original idea. I want to say that it was maybe covered in Atomic Habits by James Clear. I read that book, and I want to say this was something he sort of talked about. But if there's something you're wanting to work into your life, I would suggest that you think about how you can link it to something else. So for me, for my meditation practice, what I've been doing is getting up in the morning time, getting my exercise done, and then doing my meditation right after I exercise. Okay, so I've exercised, and then usually I'm laying on the floor on my yoga mat, or in the garage where we have squishy mats on the floor, and I just lay there and do my meditation. So if there's something you want to work into your life, how can you link it to something you're already doing? That's just a suggestion for you. So those two questions: what are you looking forward to when the stay-at-home recommendation is lifted? And what do you want to be different about your life after quarantine? What good things can you take with you from this experience? So those are our self-care check-in questions for today. So the topic that I wanted to discuss today is grief. And I feel like some of the difficulty that a person may be having with this whole experience, this whole COVID-19 quarantine, stay-at-home experience, could be that it's a trauma response or it's actual grief. I think that sometimes in our culture, we don't really think about grief apart from the physical death of someone. So as I was thinking about this, obviously deaths of people that we care about are causes of grief, but there are other things, I think, that are causes of grief in this whole experience. When you have people that you care about in the hospital, to me, there's grief that goes along with that. When you are separated from your loved ones, especially if you're an extrovert, I think there's grief that goes along with that. When you have special occasions that are canceled, I think there's grief that goes along with that. And if you have had a big change in your employment, if you are 100% working from home and you don't particularly like it, or if you are laid off, or if your job has actually ended and you are unemployed. To me, those are all things that can be causes of grief in this experience. And to me, part of what is making this whole experience so sad and hard is that we can't observe a lot of the rituals that our culture has designed to commemorate these events. So if right now, if someone that you know has died, more than likely there's going to be a funeral later, or it may be a friend of yours and the funeral is only for family because they want to limit the number of people that can attend because of social distancing. So if someone has died, there may be no funeral for you to attend, or it may be a very, very different kind of funeral than you might have expected. If you know someone who is ill in the hospital, I would say that your ability to visit that person is very restricted, whether they have COVID-19 or not. I mean, I think there are people in the hospital now for non-COVID-19 causes, and their family and friends are very restricted in being able to visit those people also. So, that's a ritual in our culture. When people go to the hospital, many times we want to go visit them. I personally will just tell y'all, I cannot look at all those pictures of people on the outside of their hospital room of their loved one with their sign telling that person. I just can't. I can't look at a whole lot of that. That is tremendously sad to me. Much less if you're actually experiencing it. If that is a reality in your life, is that you can't go see your loved one and you have to stand outside of a hospital window or door to communicate with them. That is very sad, and to me there is a lot of grief involved in that. Special occasions we can't gather to celebrate, birthdays, weddings. If you are a bride or a groom and you had your wedding planned and now you can't have it, or you have to, whatever your vision and your dream was of that wedding is so far removed from what you can actually do, that can cause grief. You can experience grief because of that. Rites of passage, graduations, proms. If you are a senior in high school, a senior in high school is a lot of what I'm thinking about right now, because I'm seeing a lot of that on social media, and there's a lot of rituals that go with that. But you could be a senior in college trying to graduate, but you high school seniors are having a senior year that looks nothing like what you expected. Your prom is either postponed or canceled. Your graduation is postponed or canceled. It's not at all what you had envisioned when you thought of your senior year, and you can experience grief because of that. Parents, if you have a senior, you are missing out on some of the rituals that help you transition into your life after your child takes his or her next step. And those rituals are things that help us make those transitions. So that's really difficult. If you are about to send your child to college, or they've graduated and they're going to be going into the work world and they're moving out of your home, you're not getting to have a lot of those experiences that kind of gradually move you toward that. You're not having the prom, you're not having the graduation ceremony. Or it may be very different if you ever get to experience it, or it may be postponed quite a long time. So you could be experiencing some of that, because that process that is normally in place to help you transition toward perhaps having an empty nest, those events are not taking place, and those are things that help people cope with that transition. This particular grief is tough because we are not sure when it will end. Sometimes in your life you have events that cause grief and there's a definite end to them. If it's someone that has been ill for a long time, has been in poor health for a long time, you can kind of think, that there will be an end in that they will eventually pass away from those illnesses. If you are going through a divorce, you know that eventually there's going to be that day when your divorce is final. So this situation we're in now is tough because we don't know when it will end. There's all these different thoughts about, some people think, it'll only be a few more weeks, and there are some longer term projections as to how long it's going to take, and that's difficult. That makes grief really tough when you can't see an end point. And then lastly, I think sometimes maybe it doesn't feel like grief, like some of these things that I mentioned don't feel like grief because something other than a physical death of a person has occurred. So you can kind of think, well, why am I so sad? Like, nobody died, you know? I mean, and I know that some of you who are experiencing this have experienced the deaths of people that you care about. But, you know, if you're thinking about your graduation being canceled, your prom being canceled, something going differently with your wedding, or, you know, not being able to visit someone in the hospital who's ill, any of those things that are attached to this particular experience that we're all having, if someone hasn't actually passed away, then you may not fully identify this as a grief experience. But grief can be attached to a lot of things that are not the physical death of a person. So I don't know that we talk about that a whole lot in our culture, and so we don't always recognize that what we're feeling is grief. We're grieving something that didn't go the way we thought it would, or we're grieving an experience that we really wanted to have and maybe had kind of taken for granted that we would have, and it's not going to happen. So I just would offer that as a question to ask yourself. Do you think that some of what you're feeling could be grief, that you're grieving something? And if you are, what do you think you're grieving? You know, what is it that's either not gone the way that you thought it would, or is not going to happen at all? And a lot of that is around expectations. So what is it particularly that is that grief event for you? So some things that might help. For some people, tears and crying are helpful, and studies have shown that emotionally induced tears release proteins and stress hormones and activate endorphins, which are your body's natural painkiller. So if you identify yourself as a crier, allow yourself to cry. But also, on the other hand, don't feel guilty if you're extremely sad but the tears don't come. I have experienced both. I would not identify myself as a big crier, and there have been times that it, on all accounts, should have been an occasion that would have been appropriate for tears, but I just didn't have them, or I didn't have them until a later date in maybe a setting where I felt more comfortable. So if you need to cry, there are definitely benefits to that, but don't feel guilty if you're not crying in an otherwise crying appropriate event. In terms of some of the things that you feel like you're missing, are there any alternative rituals that you can put together for you and your family? So I saw a lot of porch pictures for Easter this year where people were taking pictures of their family on their front porch for Easter since they couldn't go to church. I've seen lots of birthday parades, socially distanced in their cars, birthday parades for people that couldn't get together to celebrate birthdays. So what could you do to observe a special occasion if the normal celebration that you would have had cannot occur? So think about that. And it doesn't have to fit into anything you've seen. Just what could you do that would help you mark that event if you can't do what would be normal? So think about that. I have mentioned many times that books are a big part of my life, reading's a big part of my life, and so I wanted to mention that. I find that I read a lot about grief, and that began to be purposeful for me when my grandmother passed away about 4 years ago, and I really expect to read about grief for the rest of my life. And it's not always necessarily a self-help or nonfiction book. a lot of what I read are novels that involve grief and show the ways that the characters deal with it in their lives. But I do have one book to recommend if you feel like you are dealing with grief. This is called the Grief Recovery Handbook. And it's by John James and Russell Friedman. And I have done this book, and I'm not always one to do all the activities in a workbook, but I have done that book, and I did every exercise in there, and I did find it to be helpful. So the Grief Recovery Handbook, that's a recommendation for you there. So again, is reading a big part of your life? And if so, you know, how could you use reading to deal with grief? Might be something to think about. So there's not always things that we can do about events in our life that we're grieving. And so if it's one of those situations that you have to learn to accept, I have some quotes. I have 3, actually. I have a lot of quotes about grief. The first one is, grief is another world. So if you feel like you're grieving, you're probably going to look back on this time several months from now. And I know when I've been grieving different things, I can kind of look back and see how I handled something and think, well, why didn't I think of this when I was going through that? Or why did I handle it this way? And I really think that quote speaks to that. Grief is another world. Your mind is just in different places when you're grieving. So that's a quote that's helpful to me. And that is from Ariel Levy, and the book was called The Rules Do Not Apply. And that's sort of a memoir about some events that happened in her life that caused her some grief. So that might be a title that you want to look into if you're going to try to deal with grief with some reading. So Ariel Levy, The Rules Do Not Apply. Another one, some things cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. Some things cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. And that is Megan Devine, and the book was called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. So that might be another title for your grief reading list. And then the last one is, if we are to navigate it, we need a way to understand and live with the central paradox, that we must find a way of living with a reality that we don't want to be true. I'm going to read that one more time. If we are to navigate it, whatever it is causing us grief, if we are to navigate it, we need a way to understand and live with the central paradox, that we must find a way of living with a reality that we don't want to be true. And that is Julia Samuel, and the book was called Grief Works. So, some things to leave with you all today. I do not have anything for laughs. It's hard to kind of come up with something that's appropriate for laughs for grief. I don't want to invalidate anyone's grief by trying to turn it into something funny when it's not. However, I do have something for you to try, something that could be comforting. I looked on the Insight Timer app, and I found 40 plus, over 40, meditations on grief. They're actual meditations on grief. And I'm going to tell you how to get there because it's a little bit difficult to find them. When you go into the app, on the bottom row, there's a row across the bottom of the app, and there will be the second one over says meditation. So click meditation, and then there's a row of boxes sort of in the middle of the page, and there will be another box that says meditation. Click that. And then that will take you to sort of a topics screen, and they look like tags. If you'll see, like sometimes on blogs, they'll have tags of different topics. So click the one that says pain, and then scroll down a little bit on the next screen. Click the one that says depression, scroll down a little bit on the next screen, and then you'll see a tag that says grief, and that's where you find these meditations on grief. And just so you guys know, if you're short on time, once you get to the page with all the meditations that are options for you. You can go to filters and filter them by time. So if you want, like, I think there's 1 to 5 minutes, 6 to 10 minutes, you can filter that and it'll just give you meditations that are that length. Because I know you don't always have 30 minutes to do a meditation. So that's a tip for you there. And then also for our music recommendation today, there within all those grief meditations, some of them are just meditations, or they're just music meditations for grief. So if you just want to listen to some music, you can find those in the Insight Timer app in those meditations on grief. So there's some music selections within that search that we just did specifically for grief on the Insight Timer app. And I wanted to do one more meditation recommendation for you today. This one was mentioned in a training that I completed last week, and if you'll go to YouTube and search for Heart Alchemy Yoga, so Heart Alchemy, ALCHEMY Yoga, and Heart Alchemy Yoga is with Michelle Goldstein, and she is doing a 30-day meditation series specifically for COVID-19. And so I've been working through that, and I just kind of scrolled through all the days, and on day 28 she does one on surrender, and I listened to it, and I really think that that would be helpful if you're dealing with grief, would be to listen to that. And I think it's 15 minutes long, and she talks about, you know, different things in our lives that are changing, and some things are good and some things are, you know, not good. And you know, if you're a parent of a senior, you're excited that your child is about to take that next step in his or her life, and you're excited about all they've accomplished, but you also know that your life is about to change in some different ways. So check that out, day 28, surrender, and I do think that would be helpful for grieving. And that again is Heart Alchemy Yoga with Michelle Goldstein, and I will link that. I'm not sure I can link all the grief meditations in the Insight Timer, but you can rewind back through this video, and I took you step by step through how to find those. So this is a really long self-care staffing today, but it's okay. So if all hearts and minds are clear, you all take good care, and I will see you back here again tomorrow.